Good evening from beautiful Bunurong country. We are broadcasting to you live on Radio Karam from the ancient Karam Karam swamp and the unceded lands of the Eastern Kulin Nation. As always, if you'd like to join our conversation this evening, please text your questions to 0493 213 831. That's 0493 213 831. And if you miss those numbers, just hit the Contact Us button on Instagram. That'll take you straight through at Radio Architecture. We'd love to have you with us. My guest and conversation partner this evening is Yehonatan Koenig. He's a multidisciplinary artist and creative professional with a rich background in art, technology, and entertainment. Raised in New York City, Yehonatan has nurtured a profound connection to diverse cultural and technological landscapes. With degrees from the School of Visual Arts and Hunter College, he has carved a niche at the cutting edge of digital arts, serving as an art director, entrepreneur, engineer, inventor, and immersive event producer. His innovative approach has earned him collaborations with industry giants such as Disney Interactive and Imagineering, Microsoft, and Sony, making him as a leading figure in the digital arts scene. In 2015, Yehonatan returned to focus on his fine arts practice, immersing himself in the meditative practice of knowing, not knowing. Eve Wood described Koenig's work as modern-day alchemy, not in the medieval sense of transmutation, but as a profound exploration of the imagination's power. These artworks bridge the space between physical existence and philosophical inquiry, demanding an engagement of both the viewer's presence and introspection. His art evokes the space between, a stillness from which form is an internal process of birth and destruction. Welcome to the program.
Wow, that's a tough act to follow. Thank you.
You don't get a Renaissance man on the program often.
Yeah, gotcha.
Both art and engineering and tech. We'll delve
I've been
into...
busy.
You have been very busy. So glad to have you in the studio tonight, Yehonatan.
Happy to be here, thank you.
We will delve into all those themes. But the first question I do like to ask all my guests is, what's your earliest memory of a building or place?
What a beautiful question. I think my earliest memory would be a smell and the light coming in through the window. It would definitely be the smell of the desert and the warm wind. So it would be my room. It would be the room where I laid in my crib. I remember the smell of my mother's milk. I remember the light coming through the window and a kind of conscious of a odd sort of liminality. So I wouldn't be able to call it a place yet. Perhaps I'm going too far back.
You saw the light and the flickering.
The light coming through the window.
Like your drawings almost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just like that. Yeah.
Black and white. The
Black
color
and
hasn't
white.
come in yet.
Color can be very distracting, yes.
You know, you're the second guest in a row that has remembered being an infant.
Really?
Yeah. Extremely rare. In 69 conversations.
Oh, geez. For me, I can recall it quite vividly. Yeah.
When were you first drawn to mark making and art?
What another great question. As far as I can remember, I always was assembling things into some sort of patterns. So perhaps it's a kind of sort of an innate OCD, I guess. If I would see things scattered across the floor, I would want to organize them. Or if the pillow was askew, I'd like to straighten it out. Or there was a sort of a call or a natural pull to wanting to make something coherent when it wasn't, if that makes sense. Mark making, the first mark making for me, I recall, was finding the metal wrappers of gum.
Yeah.
And it wasn't so much mark making as much as little sculptures. And I realized if I crumbled them in and rubbed them on the floor or something, I could make little platonic geometries out of them. So I think that would be the earliest conscious I wanted to make it. Of course there was always paint around. I mean, I would cover myself and everyone in paint.
When did you upgrade?
To paint?
The scale of those little,
So funny. I
the
haven't
free
thought about that.
sculptures, the wrapper sculptures. When did you upgrade to something that was perhaps more tangible as a material?
Well, I mean, they were quite tangible. I mean, I thought they were like little jewels or little pieces of jewelry that I would make, and I would carry them and save them and then lose them.
And they were
Try and
special
find
to
them.
you.
They were very special, yeah. They were, and I haven't even spoken about this, I think, in a million years. So
Is that childhood imagination that is almost the life's work of an artist to return back to that original creativity?
yeah,
The original
absolutely,
whimsy?
absolutely. I used to love. I mean, I remember painting too, but I wanted to eat the paint because I just was sure that the colors they would have a flavor. So much to my chagrin, I would always end up being washed out somehow. Like those.
That's really interesting to hear, though, for me, that sensory overlay. Your first memory is the sound of your room, or the smell of your room, rather, and then you wanted the colours to have a flavour.
Yeah, I would say that flavor and smell might actually be my most evolved senses in so many ways.
Wow, because you're
Yeah.
very accomplished in drawing and making, and
It's
in the
interest-
visual creation.
Yeah, and but for me, it's the same thing. It all kind of linked sound. I mean, in a kind of synesthetic landscape, and I'm pretty sure that that I am synesthetic in some. Yeah, that I definitely am, because for me, sound and flavor and light has a sense of. It's hard to put into words, like spatial density, and the spatial density definitely has the feeling of flavor, and the spatial density or light and dark also have the idea of sound or non-sound. And so, I don't know, maybe someone dropped a tab of acid when I was 6 months. Am I allowed to say that? I'm sorry. But anyway, but I have definitely a very evolved sensory wiring.
Take me back to that light in the desert.
The light in the desert. Well, I remember we lived on the 9th floor of what was called Beit Rav Kumot in Israel. It was one of the tallest buildings in our neighborhood. And it faced east, my window, sort of southeast, if I recall.
So you had the sunset
Yeah. And
coming through, sunrise. And
sunrise,
sunrise.
And I just remember the light. I mean, it was just very special, and it was not as developed as it is now. So definitely, the desert air was present, So
Wow.
the density of it, the smell of it, but the smell of it, actually, I remember fields of I want to say it's za'atar, but it's not za'atar. I think there were just so many wild herbs. In my mind, I've constructed it as za'atar to romanticize that particular combination of, spices. But
And it keeps coming back to that flavour.
yeah, are we talking about cooking? I mean, is that what we're here to do?
That's what it feels like. That's really interesting to have that window into your world at the intersection.
Mm-hmm.
It's so popular now, isn't it? Actually, cooking and dining experiences are melding with art, are melding with performance, are having experiences in the gallery.
Sure, that makes sense. I mean, and for me, I mean, I've actually done that consciously. When the last period when I lived in LA, before coming to Melbourne, I started the idea of I was making dinners and inviting people to both be with the work, put on some music, have musicians play, and also cook a meal. It was a bit much because by the time I would finish with the meal, I was too exhausted to make any sense. So I wasn't coherent in the end of it. But yeah, I think that's key to who I am, is the idea of creating a sense of delight, a sense of connection. yeah, a sense of deep love and spiritual dimension to it.
Real holistic experience.
Indeed.
Glad you mentioned the US. You were raised in New York. What it was like, that like a loud city?
Well, I mean, so I call it raised in New York because I grew up as a teenager in New York, but I did grow up in Israel.
Yeah.
It's funny that version of that biography, but that's okay. We can go there. So I grew up in Israel, and I didn't move to New York till I was really full time till I was 16. So yeah,
You were
being
becoming an adult by that point.
yeah, becoming well. It took me, I think, about 30 years after that to become an adult. I think I was more of a wolf cub at that point.
How was the shift to American life?
From Israel, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, wow. I think it feels like washed in, of course, as a teenager, I mean, there's all just the hormonal, the insecurities, like the who am I, what am I, the language, identity, all of these things sort of were like ripped apart in really interesting ways so that I had to learn how to connect in my environment in new ways. So I think it gave me, I think like many people who are nomads or cultural nomads,
Yeah.
I think I have to learn early to adapt in different places. But I also made some wonderful friends still to this day from New York. I consider New York, in many ways I say New York is my home because it was so formative for me in so many ways.
I'm guessing that perhaps the art and the music was all simultaneous for you in that moment. That was there one key thing you turned to, or is it a full immersion?
Well, it's really funny because at that time I was sure I wanted to do theater.
Okay.
It didn't make it into the bio, but I was sure I was going to do theater because I love working with people and the staging and the lighting and the music and the relationships and just
Can you sing?
creating. Very no, I'm not going to sing. I think I can sing. You have a shower? You put a shower, I'll sing. What a great question. I'd like to say yes, but no, I'm not a very good singer. But I do appreciate good music, and I also do play a little bit piano. But it's not so much about that. It was more the idea of the space of this. Now I can apply to it words like sacred or transformative or awareness shifting, which are all very adult words. But at the time, it was really just a sense of childlike wonder,
Yeah.
I think, which attracted me to any of these things that I did. So at that time, it was theater. I had a very thick Israeli accent. And so that didn't really work very well at the time. Yeah, but I've always been making things, food, art, music, paper airplanes.
Oh, what an amazing space to really connect to like that. A place of transformation. The theatre is transformation, imagination, creation, but also one of the most dangerous buildings you could ever be in,
Indeed, yeah.
that I'm told. When did tech come up for you?
So tech came up for me when I was in grad school in New York at Hunter College. I was doing my master's, and I got a job. It actually started earlier. I mean, I would read physics books for fun as a teenager. So like I would read all the Dancing Woolly Master and the Tao of Physics and anything that kind of tried to understand the cosmology of the universe through its relational patterning in physics and cosmologies, large and small and so on. So I always had a attraction to it. So cut to master's. I'm doing my master's. I wasn't sure if it was going to be in painting or mixed media. And a friend said, hey, I'm working at this computer company. Do you want a job? We're building computers and we're building medical databases.
Wow.
Do you want to do this?
What era was that?
This was 1990 or 1991, probably just turning on 1991. I was sort of just, no, yeah, no, 1990 to be my first year of grad school.
Before .com boom, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, cut to I was actually featured in Business Week as I think it was called Digital Revolutionaries or Digital Entrepreneurs, or there's actually a Business Week article about me describing me as a sculptor breaking into digital media or redefining digital media. I was very naive back then in terms of understanding the fact that I always find myself at over the hill in terms of the adoption of culture and technology. So that I look back and realize that I'm one of the only people there. Like, that's a whole other story right there. But like, so technology, I started to build computers. Of course, I was making images, and I said, well, let me do some research on this. And I was like, oh, I can make graphics of this. I actually taught myself some basic engineering to create images and move pixels around and give them different colors. And next thing I know, I was actually looking at Cartesian space and looking at X, Y, Z. And I was like, oh, I understand this. I know where like a point is and a vector, and between the points is a line, and between, three edges is a plane, and plane share edges, and it's a quad. My mind was exploding with all this kind of nascent interest in cosmology and science, I guess. And my brain just exploded. And I ended up doing that for a few years, but then getting a job making computer games as a 3D artist.
Wow.
And so when I was finishing my master's in 1992, my confidence for the fine art world was not really well formed, well shaped, given the kind of glamour and glitz and salesmanship that needs to go with it, particularly in New York. Yeah. And so I turned more inwardly, and I've had a really incredible career making computer games for a long time.
Wow. Which titles did you make? What would we know?
Oh, geez. Ironically, the first title I worked on was called Millennium Auction. And I modeled all the 3D geometries for the spaces, for the characters. I built all the animations, the rendering, the lighting. In fact, every single 3D asset I built. And the game Millennium Auction was a kind of odd, future-looking art world where different characters were bidding on the ArtNet for different collections of art.
Wow.
Trying to corner the market. So it was a kind of like Monopoly meets art collection. So you had these avatars that you would play. And in fact, we created a whole world around the ArtNet at that point, before like artnet.com even existed, I think 15 years later. And yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to think about that. I was going to the Game Developers Conference in 1993, I think 92, 93, 94, and there was just several hundred of us there. I remember Electronic Arts announced that they made $1 million.
Wow. They became EA after.
Yeah, that's EA.
EA Games.
Yeah, EA Games. So EA Games published this, and at that time we had to invent whole new drivers for the graphics cards, which were like the old VGA style cards, to even display the graphics that we were creating for our game Millennium Auction. So I found myself in this being called to think about rendering pipelines of how do you take complex visual systems and simplify them in order to render them quickly. And I found myself having a real facility for it.
It sounds like the most perfect moment for you, with your interest in science and physics and organizing complex systems, and synthesizing and reducing them down to end up making games. I tell my students this all the time, that architects design the cities in video games. Totally. Artists are involved in that. This is a creative activity. It doesn't exist just somewhere in a vacuum of the tech world in Silicon Valley and Palo Alto.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a huge overlap between architecture and designing game worlds. I mean, there are direct overlaps, in fact. and today even more so, right? I mean, the practice of 3D modeling is inherent in the training of architects.
Entirely identical.
Yeah, yeah.
How did you take that leap to move into full-time art and being a career artist?
Wow, we're jumping from the mid '90s to the late 2000s. So I mean, gosh, I mean, so I, how did I make that leap? That's such a great question. I think in the back of my head or in the back of my heart, or if there's some dimension to it to recognize, I always was happiest when I made art. And the reason being is that any other venture involves other people, and there's just so much, you know, management and emotional drain, and not all. I mean, sometimes it's celebration as well. It's not always drain. I don't want to knock it, but there's a whole other layer to it that I think makes it harder to get at the thing that I was always looking for, which was this like really pure sense of wonder.
Mm.
And when I did find myself in the Pacific Northwest woods with just an ink pen and a pad, just drawing the patterns of roots and bark and water and leaves, something was lit in me, which was original, and I don't mean not using the word original in terms of art, it was original within me. It was a touch an original sense of wonder and exploration and curiosity.
That earnest inner truth.
Absolutely, yeah. Earnest inner truth. Rare thing these days.
Well, Gaudi, very famous Catalan architect, used to say that copying from nature was collaborating with a creator.
Oh, absolutely, and I love Gaudi. I visited the sacred.
Sagrada Familia should be done in 2
Familia.
years. So plan your trips to Barcelona.
Absolutely.
After 126 years under construction.
That's incredible, yeah.
Be done in 2026 for the centenary.
Let's go.
The Gaudi centenary of his death.
Yeah,
An amazing commitment. Like, do we put that fortitude into any wonders anymore? Into finishing that was something that was started, and then he left very few records or models behind.
Yeah, I think that brings up for me the sense of time, and the work that I do really requires a tremendous amount of presence and attention, and it's kind of insane because there's so many different ways for me to see the spaces I'm trying to see without this kind of meditative process I've overlaid it with. Excuse me, I need to
But it's a flow state, So it's a flow state of that work. Why resist it?
Oh, totally. I mean, I think it's about slowing time down. Well, it's not really slowing time down. It's actually slowing your awareness down. We're not really, time is what we come into relationship with and how we relate to it through our awareness.
You've got a very intense focus on the observation and the way that you see the work or what you're trying to represent.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and it is very much related to the insights I had in 3D rendering as well, and trying to understand what would make 3D rendering on GPUs work is directly correlated to what I do with the ink and paper, that I'm really trying to see something new. I which is why my work is generally abstract and not representative, or not, doesn't really, it's not real pictorial space. It's not a real place.
For me, they're very open-ended. I absolutely love your work, and when I look at those drawings, I see a whole architectural universe, a whole landscape, a little bit video game, a little bit cubist, a little bit of a labyrinth of sorts.
Oh, a labyrinth. They really are a labyrinth. Yeah. Yeah, so the practice, I call it knowing, not knowing for a reason. And I really aim to hold my attention and my awareness in a space between starting to recognize what it is and then also not recognizing what it is.
Is that resistance active? Are you consciously
Absolutely.
fighting your ability to recognize and identify?
It comes in so many different densities. Sometimes it flows, and sometimes you're resistant, and your mind really wants to make it a thing. Sometimes it doesn't. So there's always a, for lack of a better term, wrestling with contrast. And I think that polarity, I think we all have to deal with that polarity in life. So, I mean, everything's made out of these poles,
Yeah.
at least in this particular realm of existence. Although I believe there's a third, which I can talk to when you can witness it. The witnessing of the polarities does become an odd third. And I believe that's kind of a place where we perceive beauty.
Say more.
So out of the chaotic patterns of our lives, when we recognize that something makes sense, it comes into coherence.
Yeah.
At the same moment, it is also coming out of coherence, and recognizing that is an exhilarating, whether your consciousness, you've identified it as the actual thing or not, doesn't matter. I spend time identifying it as the thing. So I create the experiment for me to kind of trick my mind to, almost, I lose my words here, which is why I make the drawings, I guess.
Awesome. What is the routine you get into in order to be able to go to that place to create your art?
I think consistency is key. It doesn't always come easy, which is why I have these sort of sets of algorithms I work with. If you see the work, there are these particular mark makings I've created, which are almost like what I consider quantum little particles that I rotate and shift in different directions in space. Or they're like rhythms, like the way a drummer plays. They're these kind of rhythmic pieces that start to assemble almost in this kind of like particle cellular manner. And what I have in mind is the idea of like, I'll pose a question, and I guess it's almost like, and it's almost like I'll ask myself, what is density?
Yeah.
Like, what is the nature of density, or what is the nature of emptiness, or what is it like when this emptiness has a thing in it,
Okay.
and that thing is vertical or that thing is horizontal? And so I just start to play with these sort of minimal little concepts and see how they expand from there.
It's coming full circle for me because these are all physics questions.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Your initial interest in physics as a teenager still
Indeed.
remains consistently present with you.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about scale. The majority of your works are at around A2, A3.
They're getting into, so wait, tell it to me in A2 is in
Oh,
inches.
yeah, of course, American to Australian paper sizes.
So it's like 60 centimeters, so like 59 by 60 by 40 is A2, right? Is that right? Like
Yeah.
600 millimeters by 400.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's I'd say medium to large for me.
Okay.
I tend to constantly sketch at A3,
Yeah.
but then I also take many A2s and assemble them together as well. And I've been really keen on scaling the work. The works are really springboards into that state of awareness of knowing, not knowing, where things exist in a kind of liminality, where for me, or what I'm hoping for the viewer, invites them into that place,
To that in-between space.
into that in-between space where like, yeah, it just becomes about the physics of perceptions, which are sort of is in a way a priori to identity,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How does your experience of making the work shift as the scale increases?
You're finding me right inside of that investigation because I've spent so much time training my hand to work at a certain scale. And so I'm wondering what happens to the mark making at a larger scale. And so I'm in that process right now of seeing what will happen. I'm also really into making etchings right now. So taking the pieces and scaling them up through etching. So I'll photograph the work, I'll scan the work, and I'll scale it up, and I'll use that to what's called a photogrove. It's a photographic etching process of transferring the image into the plate and creating an intaglio plate from it and then printing it. And so there's a whole other dimension coming through. I've also started to take the pieces and animate them.
Wow.
So I'll take the drawings and I'll create these algorithms and animations, and then I'll find frames that I like. I'll put those back on paper and draw from them. So I've relaxed the process I've relaxed the process between these different mediums. The hand, the computer, the photography and etching. And we'll see where it goes.
You have such a rigor in your work, such a rigor in your process that for me sounds very familiar, feels very and sounds very architectural. Also sounds very scientific, very technical. And when you're writing code, of course, you can't be sloppy because you'll have hundreds of mistakes and bugs everywhere in it, right?
Exactly, yeah. Well, the funny thing about that is my code was very sloppy. I'm a very bad code writer. I'm very good at understanding the algorithmic systems that need to come together to work. And so I would work with very good engineers with me in order to get my stuff to actually work and collaborate with them. So I work with some amazing engineers on that side. And so I have a very fast mind for solving complex systematic problems, and I like to say that I'm 90% accurate 100% of the time.
What would you say to people who are working in a really technical field, in a really technical industry, and are struggling to engage with their creative side?
Oh gosh, I mean, put down the phone, put down the media, and get out to nature and learn to be quiet. I think there's learn to be quiet. I mean, I think meditation, we hear about it and it's become so freaking
such a buzzword, isn't
such a buzzword, and it's kind of lost. I don't want to say it's lost. I don't want to be judgmental about it, but I think meditation has been key in my experience, and learning to understanding that the capacity to listen is being quiet, just as the capacity to see is not knowing what you're looking at. It's the same thing for me.
Not trying to project an answer, not overlaying.
Yeah, you can almost do it as like an exercise. I could sit and look at you and be like, I can look at you, and Ilana, and I like her frames, they're really cool, and she's wearing like a cool jacket. And I can name it. I can go through a kind of like syntax or a semiotic of understanding what I'm seeing. The brain is very good at it, decoding it, putting the meaning. Or I can relax into it and just sort of not know what I'm seeing. And sort of the colors just become shapes, and you become aware of a different place. And so I think that training yourself to do that, and whatever, there's no right or wrong tradition, it's just whatever connects you to it. Nature is, I think, our greatest teacher. Or maybe death is our greatest teacher. But nature is a really good ally.
One of those only comes around once, and the other we can go outside and find every day.
Oh, very well said, yeah.
Art practice for you feels like this grounding, this constant, but also very explorative, very imaginative thing. Who have been some of your mentors, your teachers, who set you on your course?
Wow, it's so, what another great question. So where do you go back to answer that? My parents loved art and theater, and they were gregarious personalities, and we'll just leave it at that. And I grew up with the walls covered in paintings. My mom would take us to galleries and museums all over the place, and we'd talk about it. And so I think the natural whatever it is that makes us who we are, and from the nature component, the nurture was there as well. And so I connected with my parents through art, for sure. I think all of the brothers did in some dimension. So I always had a love for that in the familial sense. But I always gravitated, as a younger man, I gravitated to the most phantasmagorical stuff. So like, it would be Hieronymus Bosch, and from Hieronymus Bosch, it would be Francis Bacon and Lucian Freud, and it would be like these intense emotional like places. But what really struck me now when I look at it was just the incredible sense of the interface of the human with the materiality and the canvas. Even though the figuration, of course, is gorgeous and evocative and emotional and melancholy and tortured and fine. But the actual idea that the human interface to the material and the canvas in a point in time is really what struck me. And so from there it would evolve into characters like Rothko and, of course, James Turrell and Agnes Martin, some more meditative places where space and experience become liminal and vast rather than condensing into kind of the human narrative.
Yeah, that category of art that has to be felt rather than just seen.
Yeah, exactly. For me, it's I go through all the emotions when I'm working. It's a constant management and choreography with one's emotions. And
how long did it take you to find your trust in your process?
it took me, I would say, 25 years of avoiding it. It's it's the irony of our expertise. So here's the thing: when I was in art school in New York, I went to School of Visual Arts as a fine arts major, as a painting major, and then Hunter College, where I was studying, became more theoretical. Of course, we all had to read Derrida and Baudrillard and Wittgenstein, and I think most graduate students in art studied more literary criticism than anything else at the time. It actually put me off a bit, and I couldn't find my place within it. And I realized that I just couldn't connect with the salesman portion of it. It's like, how do you speak about what you make in order to, connect with the gallerist or curator or collector apparatus in order to find value. So then I ended up founding 3 different companies over the years, like game company, a computer animation company, an immersive VR company. And in all of those places, as an entrepreneur or as technology entertainment or entertainment technology entrepreneur, I had to become a marketing and salesperson. Because that's the only way, in the end you have to sell. So what I ran away from is exactly what I spent 25, 30 years doing.
Yeah, what you avoid is what you have to become.
Yeah. So here I am. So when you ask me the question now, how did I know? I sort of have no more fucks left to give, so to speak.
Yeah.
I just love what I do. I'm super confident about it. I believe that it's important for people to recognize that there's realms of perceptions and unknowable realms of perception, transcendent realms of perception and awareness that are there to enter, that are actually healing and a relief from the so much knowing, from the ambition and from the status and the identity and all those things that, are great. I like my luxury as well.
Yeah.
But I can also relax into the mystical not knowing now with full confidence. And I want to take people with me.
What advice do you have to the future generation of artists or emerging artists who are struggling perhaps with that unknowing?
What advice? We live in we're living in really interesting times, so What advice do I have? I mean, I'm trying to find something that doesn't sound so freaking, like rote. Like, oh, this is a good one. I mean, I think there's definitely confidence and consistency. So I'm gonna say, you got to keep working. You got to keep working. I think there's a bit of it's a stoic thing to say, which is the obstacle is the way. Like the thing which you are most resistant to is what you have to lean into.
There's your marketing problem.
It is like the marketing problem. Like where you feel the obstacle is the way.
It's like massage where it hurts, push harder.
Yeah. And there's a truth to that. I mean, you don't sharpen a knife on air. You sharpen a knife on a stone. I mean, everything, again, it gets into that concept, like explore those polarities. Don't indulge in them. Explore them fully, though. So, yeah, tenacity, consistency. Yeah, those are good. I think those are good ones to leave people with, for sure. Tenacity and consistency. Oh, here's a good one. Sailing was not invented by contemplating sinking.
There you go.
That's the one.
I've got another overextended metaphor in that one, that a smooth sea never made a skilled sailor.
Yeah, that's exactly.
With your expertise in tech, I'm really interested in your perception and your perspective on AI
Wow. Yeah.
right now, and particularly what does that mean for art? And what does it mean for the models that are trained on other people's art?
Wow, it's a complex question. I mean, we're clearly dealing with a huge unknown. So first, let me say this. Whenever there's been technological innovation, there has been a shift in labor particularly around production and around manufacturing. You could say that we're facing a shift like that now. That's obviously more extreme and larger than any we've faced before, given the power of what AI is demonstrating. So that's a concern for me, just because I think it comes to the question of like what we do with this idea of
Everyone's afraid that so many
labor.
jobs are going to be replaced.
Yeah, exactly. What happens to all the jobs and people without jobs, and what's going to happen there? But AI in itself is a tool. Oh man, I'm trying to figure out which way to go on this, really, because it's really a big question.
Wait, let's take the polarities, as you say.
Yeah.
Let's take it both. Let's take it from a tech perspective and from an artistic perspective.
Okay, so yeah, I'll tell you this. I'm so interested in the human experience. I don't really care about AI image making.
You're not stressed about it.
I'm not stressed out about it because I think, I mean, I'm not. It doesn't stress me out if the image is made by a computer. Great. I mean, but I don't think I think we're so obsessed with the quality of the image. It's like pornography. I mean, I almost look at art like AI art, comparing pornography to actual lovemaking, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Great. It's almost, and it draws from the tyranny of the consensus or from the democratization of the search. And of course, then you can train it and you can make it. It does beautiful things, but it's a bit. I don't care about it. I don't care about art made by computers. I care about what humans make. And so for me, I think and I'm not stressed about it because like I just want to know if I can't recognize it, that's okay. I mean, that's an interesting point of like, what is it when you can't recognize what the truth is anymore? I suppose I should be thinking about it a lot more than I do, but I'm enjoying my practice so much, and I'm just like, there's so many hours in the day.
Yes.
I'm really learning that to focus on what makes on what I can be grateful for, rather than what stresses me out. But AI it's here. It's here. I mean, we might be AI for all I know. I don't know. What do you think? I mean, in the practice, am I allowed to ask you questions?
Yeah, of course you are.
And maybe that will bring something out.
I think there's definitely a lot of unknown questions about legislation and regulation and what frameworks we're going to put around it. Suddenly I've seen in the academic space everyone's scrambling to create policies and where you can and can't use it, and where does the tool end and when does it become plagiarism. Definitely agree with the sentiments of it is a tool. Perhaps from the Labor perspective, the future will mean that we will just shift into different sorts of work and different sorts of labour. Maybe there'll be a return to the handmade craft or appreciating the handmade craft and those talents. Again, maybe there could be silver lining in the resistance away from it.
I think there's probably, I think there's definitely an artisanal, I mean, you see that there is a desire for an artisanal shift in culture in general. So that's an interesting thing to track, definitely. The idea that we want our senses to be engaged in a certain resonance and way that perhaps AI is not there but promises to be. So that's what starts to get scary. But I think we definitely need policy. But look, the reason I'm stuttering on all this is really that, I mean, the entire nature of what we consider real across every dimension is shifting. I mean, we've seen it. I mean, the entire
This is what physicists do every day.
Yeah, the entire language of how we describe our reality or information is shifting so drastically that I think in many ways people's brains are broken. I mean, we're developed against a hereditary background that's designed to arrive at a certain kind of limbic comfort and connection at a certain scale. And I think there's just so much information that's hitting it that there's an incoherence inside the system. And so we're inside a moment of a great evolutionary leap in which AI clearly plays a part. I tend to not be judgmental about it, like, oh, it's the end of the world, it's the end of art. I think plagiarism is a real issue. But I think there's something interesting about what is the role of the artist, what is the role of art where the narrative, the pictorial space, the narrative, the human, the identity, the story, the entertainment, the cinema is actually a kind of, it's supposed to be like a mirror of reality. And yet most people have not actually learned to identify the inner landscape from where that arises. And so you're sort of jumping from one intense state to another without the capacity to regulate your own nervous system and find balance inside of it. And so I believe, and some other artists and I believe, that for me the role of art right now is to almost generate a kind of alternative. I mean, I think James Turrell is a great example, where art becomes, a transmutation. All these freaking words, but it becomes a multi-sensory experience that is absolutely what it is, and it defies interpretation in many ways. It's not a story, it's not a person, it's not anywhere. It's just an experience between an awareness and the thing, so to speak.
Keeps trying to pull the audiences back to being present. I really hear that, and I think people are very much chasing authentic experiences. Picking up on your point about artisanal interests or artisanal craft. Do you think there's a difference between craft and design?
Yeah, well, design is solving for a problem normally. I mean, it's a kind of engineering problem. You're like, it depends what you can say. I mean, obviously there's a difference between industrial design and graphic design or just, interior. But I think design has a practicality to it. The form needs to serve a function in design, in my understanding, although I'm happy to also relax that a bit if I need to. Craft really is about the ability to have attention for the most optimal and best results of particular materials and tools, and training yourself towards that result. So I don't think design seems to be better with good craft, but I don't think it's necessarily reliant on it. There's certainly lots of ways to present good design without being a good craftsperson anymore. So yeah, maybe I'm talking myself into a circle here, but it's yeah, I think it's really interesting. I kind of went down my own rabbit hole here.
An idea popped to me in answer to that question, because it is one I contemplate often, is perhaps design is in service of a problem and craft is in pursuit of a pleasure.
Ooh, interesting. Craft is in pursuit of a pleasure.
We could both ruminate on that one.
Yeah, what does art sit now in that?
Showing to reveal, right?
Showing to reveal.
Looking to reveal, trying to show you something or a perspective on that you haven't considered, that you haven't thought, that wasn't there. Yeah, a feeling you perhaps tried to avoid.
Yeah, I like it. That's good. I need to ruminate on that. Yeah, that's good. You gave me something to think about for sure.
Listeners, if you've got an answer to that question, you can text us on 0493 213 831. Where do you think the future direction, and there's many threads of directions in art, of course, but where for you do you feel the major current of art is going? Do you have any predictions for us?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're so many different ways to answer that. Well, one thing we're seeing is that I think there's such an incredible amount of wealth with people who have incredible amount of wealth. And I'm not saying this in any kind of political sense, but what's happening is that very wealthy people are now essentially curating their own environments beyond just collecting objects. And so their spaces are becoming essentially fully immersive, bespoke environments. And so we're finding interior designers and environmental artists and projection artists and painters and sort of collaborating to creating these kind of amusement centers. I guess amusement centers at their worst, I would say, because amusement by itself, I have nothing against amusement. I don't want to be judgmental, but, from essentially very robust fun parks for very wealthy people, and I think it's cool. I think there's some really interesting things being made there. So that's on one hand, and of course, in the more popular, in the more accessible cultural way, there's all these immersive environments opening, with these sort of projection, and we're going to see a lot more of that. These sort of entertainment centers, visual entertainment centers, audiovisual entertainment centers.
Places like the Loom.
Exactly, places like the Loom. Yeah, I was trying to remember the name of it here. Yeah.
When it opened, I was a little bit shocked that there would be that much interest. People love it.
I'm becoming such a Luddite. I'm becoming such a Luddite because there's something about needing to work for it that has has a greater, a greater sense of accomplishment at the end of it. I don't like seeing, like Da Vinci scaled and projected. I think it takes it out of context. I lose the physicality and the relationship of the artist to the place.
And the brushstrokes.
And the brushstrokes
standing in front of
it. Yeah, I think that interface of material and place is so freaking important, and I don't know enough about what education for younger kids are these days to really know if that's being captured in meaningful ways. But I hope it does. Yeah, and also I'm so as an artist, I haven't been in the mainstream, given that I came back to fine art as an older man. Older man. You know what I mean? Like I came to it already in my mid 40s or into my 50s already. So
Do you believe in the tribes that you can't move from a different allied industry, from design into art? Someone
No,
said
I
that to
don't.
me earlier in the week.
I don't believe in any of that. I think there's so it's all stories. Everything is really the story we tell ourselves and the story we invest in ourselves. And I think we need to learn we are not the story. We're making the story. You are making your own story. You have to have the capacity to listen to it. That's what we spoke about, the capacity to be silent. In fact, the greater the capacity to be silent, the greater the capacity to listen and make the story, ironically. So, yeah, and I think, obviously in sort of the art world, there's a huge amount of identity, investigation of identity dynamics in art right now, which I think is important, of course, as terminologies, gender terminologies, and ethnic terminologies are getting reinterpreted. I also think that inside of it, we're missing the phenomena of wonder and delight, and that's fine. We'll come back. It's just a big oscillating machine.
It'll come full circle. That wonder and delight is so important. As architecture is finally returning to beauty, and the conversations about beauty not being forbidden.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And I love that return. I'm mindful of the time, so I'll ask my last question.
Oh really? Are this is
time flies on radio architecture.
Holy moly!
What gives you hope?
What gives me hope? Can it be a who and a what?
Of course.
My relationship with my amazing partner gives me hope. My relationship with my son gives me hope. Fresh vegetables give me hope. Being aware of knowing that I still have the capacity to witness beauty arise out of incoherence. In fact, I would say what gives me hope is knowing that beauty arises in coherence.
That's wonderful. I do want to sneak one more question in just to bring it full circle. And that's, what flavor should everyone go and try this week?
Ooh, what flavor?
Yeah.
Oh, that's really good. That's a really good question. Okay. Pistachio.
I think that's achievable. We can find that in most ice cream parlors.
Yeah, pistachio ice cream, yeah.
Awesome. There's a mission. Thank you so much for joining us on the program, Yehonatan.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me for another evening of radio architecture with Ilana Razbash. This live show was broadcast and recorded in the Radio Karim studio on Bunurong country. You can replay this show wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and supporting community radio. Take care.
Hey, this is Marcus from the Darlings Family Trust. You're listening to Radio Karim.
A shining light and heavy sounds falling